So we are converting this diagram from orthographic to isometric. This is sketch, and at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to have up there as the diagram. Now, first of all, I started with an horizontal line. I mark a point. Then from the point, I put my protractor. So with my protractor there at that point, I get 90-degree upward, 30 to the left, and 30 degrees to the right with my protractor. So that the point of intersection are now joined together with my ruler. So that's the basics for isometric projection. 30, 30, then 90. Now, I started with the diagram itself. So the vertical line. So for my sketch, I make sure that all dimensions, all drawings, all lines are equated with what I have from my sketch. So I started with a vertical line of 2.8, since the total height is 2.8. So I mark my line of 2.8. So from this vertical line of 2.8, I make sure that all other lines are faint, so that it will be the only main drawing that will be thick line following the sketch that I have up there. So now after that line of 2.8, I take my set square and my ruler, because I want to get my left isoplane and my right isoplane. For my right isoplane, I make use of my 60-degree set square and making sure that the ruler is always on the construction line. Then also for my left isoplane, I do the same but to the other side. But when you're making use of this, you make sure that your ruler is on the construction line. Then your set square aligned with the ruler, making sure the ruler doesn't shake. So the other dimension there, I take 0.8 and 0.8. So after that, I take my ruler and my set square also again to get the vertical plane. In this, I make use of my other set square. I can only use this 45-degree set square for a vertical line for the vertical axis. So I join the two 0.8. Then I take my 60-degree set square so that I can get my left isoplane from that point there. So with my left isoplane, for my left isoplane, I now take the dimension, because that part there is just like a square. So I take the dimension of 2.8 also, and I mark the points. So taking the dimension of 2.8, from here I get 2.8. From the other points there also, I got 2.8. And from the point downwards also, I got 2.8. Then from this 2.8, I'm trying to put the dimension, but I later erase it so that it will not alter the drawing. But at the end of the day, it must look at what I have from my sketch, which above there is the main diagram when I was done. So the question is given in orthographic. Return it to isometric and draw it out. So the next thing now is for me to get with my set square and my ruler. I get vertical line from that 2.8, and with my 60-degree set square, I get vertical line that's right isometric axis to the other 2.8 to join also, so that I can have that shape there. Then I join some thick lines that will be needed to show how my sketch was. Initially, I joined this as a straight line, but I then observed that there's a space in between the upper part there, which will be useful for the other part of the drawing. So I have to erase that middle part out. So that I can have this part now. Then I join the other part that is fully closed. Then I continue with the drawing. Now I decide to start with the left hand side to get my shape first before I now go to the right hand side to do the same. Now what is being done? Firstly, from the left hand side now, I take my dimension, trying to mark them out, trying to do some calculations to know how the distance is going to be. So from here, I was able to get from the right hand side firstly, I was able to get 0.7. So 0.7 down, 0.7 down, then from here 0.7 left, 0.7 right. So 0.7, 0.7, because it's been centralized in a 14 distance, which is in the middle of 28. That's 0.7, 0.7 left and right also. So I do the same thing at this point, 0.7 and also 0.7. Now, after getting those two, I now take my set square, my 60-degree set square. I get from this 0.7 of the right hand side and the other 0.7 of the right hand side, I get my isoplane right from there. Now I want to do the same thing for the other 4 0.7 at the left hand side. But to do that, I firstly take my horizontal line, I take it downward so that I can have enough space to work with. I take it out down twice. So I take it down once, I put it on that new line, I take it down again, making it twice. And after getting the second one now, that's the point that's the line I now use for my reference. So I now place my ruler on the lower parts. I place my ruler on that line. Then I set square to the line so that I can get my right isoplane from that 0.7, from the first 0.7 downwards. So I get my 4 lines, the first one down, the second one downwards, the third one up there also. But to do the upper parts, I place my ruler upward to the next line. So I take my ruler upward to the next line. So do the upper parts, like yes. So making sure that your ruler is always on the line, then your set square aligned to the ruler. You just drive your set square with it. So I was able to get the 4 lines from each of those 0.7. Now I now continue to the left part, leaving the first part yet. I now start with the left part so that I can get the left part drawing, then continue. So first of all, going with my sketch, make sure to make sure it looks exactly like my sketch. So I now started with the dimension. So I started with 1.4. So I mark a point of 1.4 downwards from the 0.7, and from the other 0.7 also 1.4. So specifically what I just did is that from the first 0.7 points, I got 1.4 downwards on that right isoplane. So I got 0.7, no, not 0.7. I got 1.4, 1.4, 1.4. So for the first, so for those two, I do two first. So for the first two, my ruler is placed on the construction line, although I didn't capture it here, but it's placed on the construction line. Then with my set square, I got vertical line through the 1.4. Now, for the other 2 points also, I also bring out the 1.4 distance from each of the 0.7. So 1.4, 1.4 also. I mark out the points. Now, from this point of 1.4 for that I have for the two, I now take my set square also again and my ruler. I also do the same thing by getting a vertical line that intersects the 2 points. So from those two 1.4, I got a vertical line intersecting the 2 points. Now, from here, what's next? The next thing to do is to get to this shape. Now, this is being done with an isocircle. It means an isometric circle. So it means I'm going to get a square. Then from those square, I'm going to get an isosquare to get an isocircle. Because a circle in isometric form is not a circle. It becomes an isometric circle, which is an ellipse. So to do that, I already have my, so that's 1.4, 1.4. I already have my square here. So I firstly join the longest diagonal. That's from here to here. You know, everything starts from a midpoint for a circle. Same thing applies for what? Isocircle. Then I join the shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the two opposite sides. So the shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the two opposite sides. That's what is being done there. The shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the two opposite sides. Then after that, I take my compass. Now, with my compass, I take the distance between the shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the opposite sides so that I can get an arc that will intersect the 2 points at the time. So this arc will be thick, just like I have it from my diagram or from my sketch. Then with the same, okay, yeah. So I only, since I'm not dealing with a full circle yet, so I only use that one to get that part. But now I also want to get the other curve also at the same time. Distance between the two is 1.4. So what do I have to do? I take my set square and my ruler on the construction line. I transfer these points to the left with my left isoplane. I transfer that line. So I now take out my 1.4. Since from there to 1.4, I observe that 1.4 is also intersecting at that point. So which means if I take the same radius that I use for the first arc and I put it at this point, this midpoint here, it's also going to intersect from down to that same intersection also. So I draw it out as a curve or as an arc. So now that I have these two arcs, now remaining the smaller ones. So the smaller ones also, this is what I did. Where the longer diagonal intersects with the shorter diagonal is what I mark out to be the center for the other arc. Although I was firstly picking up another point, but I later got the right one. So where the longer diagonal, so don't make the mistake, where the longer diagonal intersects with the shorter diagonal, that shorter diagonal that is meeting with the midpoints of the side. So that's what I use. So longer diagonal with the shorter diagonal there. So the intersection there is where I put my pinpoint of my compass. Then I take the radius with the edge of that arc so that it intersects coming down from that arc downwards to the other parts of that point there. So I have that lower part as a curve. So I raise it, making sure that it's just a single line that is visible at that point. You shouldn't have a double line, even though it's a thick line. Now, after getting that lower arc, I now also want to do the same thing like I did for the bigger arc. I want to transfer the midpoints so that I can get the lower arc. Now, what do? I take my ruler on the construction line. I put my set square on the ruler. So from the midpoint, I draw this last arc from. That's where the longer diagonal intersects the shorter diagonal. I transfer it up with the left isoplane. So the distance is going to be what? It's still going to be 1.4. So from that point, so I just need the midpoint for this one. So for that point, I transfer that midpoint with distance of 1.4. And after getting the 1.4, I take my compass with the same radius I did for that smaller circle or the smaller arc. So I put my compass at the midpoint there. I can adjust it. So you just take it from that point, from that arc downwards. It should not be entirely full because next, so I join the points together, tangential. So next, I take out the lines that are construction lines, but it should not be as visible as the thick line. So I join the thick line of that up. I join the thick line of this lower part, so that my diagrams will be. It's already started looking like the sketch or like what I have up there. Then next is for me to get the smaller isocircle within that hollow space. So which means I'm going to repeat the same procedure, but this time around is a different radius entirely. It's a different diameter, it's a different radius, or it's a different side for the square. Now the square is 1.4 itself. Is it? Yes. So that means I'm taking 0.7. I'm taking 0.7 from the midpoints. Now, as I said, everything starts from the midpoint, even for a square and also for a circle and even for an isocircle. It can also start from a midpoint. So I mark 0.7 to my left, 0.7 to my right. Also 0.7 up and 0.7 down. Through the isoplane right and vertical line that pass through that point. So then I now take my set square and my ruler. Now my ruler now being placed on the construction line. Make sure your ruler is always on the construction line. You know where the construction line is, the one I transferred downward. So my ruler on the construction line and my 60-degree set square. So I first started from the lower 0.7. I draw the right isoplane, upper 0.7 right isoplane. Then I now do the same thing for the vertical. So I for the left 0.7 vertical, right 0.7 vertical. At the end of the day, I was able to get my iso square. Now, from this iso square, I repeat the same procedures of getting my iso circle. So what's the first thing? Join the longer diagonal. Now, from the longer diagonal, join the shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the two opposite sides, which is being done here. Now, what's the next thing? I take my compass. With the radius from the shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the two opposite sides, I got the arc that's needed that part. So I was able to get the arc at that part. From midpoints, from the shorter diagonal to the midpoints of the opposite side. So I got an arc. Then with the same radius, the other point of the shorter diagonal also, I also get an arc that will intersect the other two opposite sides. So it also intersect the other two opposite sides also. Now after that, I now take the small radius whereby the longer diagonal intersect with the shorter diagonal, then to the edge of that arc, and I get the upper part. So I was able to enclose that upper part. Now the same thing for the lower part, where the longer diagonal intersects the shorter one. I put it at that point of intersection. I also get the lower part so that the whole structure there can be enclosed. So that's what I have for the left part. So I join them together so that I can now get my isocircle. This is the procedure for getting your isocircle, actually. Now, I erase out the lines that are not necessary. They are construction lines, but they should be faint, not as thick as the main line. Although I would have erased this completely, that even you will not be able to see it, but I want it to be that, yeah, you will know that there's a line there that is being gotten. So I joined the thick line at this lower part and the thick line at this other part. But yeah, I didn't join this vertical line that's supposed to be there. So I joined this smaller vertical line. There's a vertical line in between these parts. Although I later did that before I was done. So I joined it in. That's what you have up there. Now I want to do the right hand side now. So the right hand side now, I already have that line there. So it's of 1.4, then 1.4, because everything in total is what, 2.8. So I firstly mark out 1.4, then another 1.4. I mark 1.4, then another 1.4. Then from the other point also, remember how do we get those points? 0.7 down, right? So from the other point also, I got 1.4 to my, then another 1.4 also. So after getting those 2 points, I then continue to the next part. You can see it's already looking like a sketch. So now we want to get the other part of the structure. Now, what do I have to do? I'll take my ruler and my set square. So my ruler will be on the construction line. So I join this thick line here. So from this thick line downwards of 0.7, then to 2.4. No, not 2.4, 1.4. So 0.7, 1.4. So my ruler on the construction line. Then my 60-degree set square aligned with the ruler. I get my left isoplane from the 3 points of the 1.4. From each of those points, I get my left isoplane. So what next? The total width of these parts is 2.8 in total. So I mark out the 2.8 distance. Now getting the 2.8 from each of the 1.4 and the other 1.4. So from that point now, I now take my ruler and my set square, making sure my ruler is still on the construction line. Always make sure it's on the construction line. Then with my set square. So my 60-degree set square also, not my 45. So I get my right isoplane passing through that 2.8. Now, from this structure, I want to get the curve that will be up there from this sketch as you have it there. So the distance from there is 1.4, the other part 1.4, 1.4, 1.4, middle to mid. So everything is 2.8 by 2.8. So I already have my square parts up there. So I just have to do what? Join the longer diagonal. So bringing it in so that you can see it clearly. So join the longer diagonal. That's from this point to this other point there. Now, after the longer diagonal, I join the shorter diagonal, this one here, with the two midpoints of the two opposite sides. The midpoint of that other one is 1.4. So I was able to do that also. So I join it together. Now with my compass, with the ratio, with the radius from the shorter diagonal to the midpoint of the opposite side. So I take that as a compass, as a radius. So the pinpoint now at the shorter diagonal, I get my first arc at that part. Now, after getting the first arc, so I now take the smaller radius, that's where the shorter and the longer diagonal intersect with that edge of that arc, or with the midpoint of that line. So I also get an arc. I will come from up there to down here. Then I join them together also as a thick line, so that I can have that upper part. Now, I want to do the same thing downwards. Like, okay, I want to do it downwards. So I was able to transfer the midpoint of where I get that smaller one, because it's just the smaller one I need. So I transfer it downwards. Since I know the space there is 1 point, so I use my set square. Since I know the space there is 1.4, so I take it from there down. I mark 1.4. So that's after using my vertical axis. So with that 1.4 now, I take my radius. Since the radius remains the same as the one I used for that first part, so I put it at that point and I get my arc. My arc starts from that point also, not entirely full. So next, I'm going to take my ruler. So I draw a tangential between the two arcs. So which is being done there. So then I remove the lines that are not necessary. They are construction lines, but they should be faint line. So from there, I now want to get, so I join the other thick line there. So now I want to get the smaller isocircle that is to be at the center parts of that point there. And as I've said, all circles started from a point. Then at the same time, an isocircle started from where? From a point. Now, what's the total dimension for the isocircle or for that circle? It is 1.4. So that means you are taking 0.7 also. So the two lines connected to it is 0.7 up, 0.7 down. So 0.7 up and 0.7 down. Then from here also 0.7 up, 0.7 down. I also did the same. But the one down will be intersecting at this edge here. Then I was seeing a little bit of error, so I have to convert my measurements also. So make sure it is 100% accurate, because when it's not accurate, there might be an error, because this engineering drawing is purely with accuracy and what and speed. So 0.7 up, 0.7 down, then 0.7 left and right. Now from those 2 points, so 0.7, 0.7, from the midpoint also 0.7, and down there it's at that point. So I take my set square and my ruler also, because I want to get line passing through them. So my ruler on the construction line, I use the first line. Then my set square, now my 60-degree set square. So I firstly get an left isoplane from that upper 0.7 that is passing through it. Then also I make use of my right isoplane, then so that it will pass through the left 0.7 I join, then the right 0.7 I also join. Now I have my square now, which will be make use of to get what? To get my isosecond. Now what do I now do? The same procedure, right? Yes. So I join the longer diagonal. That's first. So I join the longer diagonal. Now what do you do next? Yes, I join the shorter diagonal to the midpoint of the two opposite sides. So I know the midpoint there will be 0.7. So I also join that also together, because that line there is 1.4. So I take my radius, my shorter diagonal with the edge of the shorter diagonal with what? With the midpoint of the opposite side. So I join together as a curve. Now I need the full circle in this place. So the other points also with the same radius too. I join together as a curve. Now what do I do next? I take a small radius between where the longer and the shorter diagonal intersect, right? Then I take it to the point, so that I can join it to the right. I can join it to the left. So this is how we take the construction, step by step, approaches by approaches. But everything started from my sketch, right? Yes, because we are given in third angle projection. The plan was up and the front view was done. So firstly, I have to project how it's going to be if this diagram is to be in isometric form. How is it going to be? That's what I have as a sketch there. And with those sketch, I was able to get my dimensions, and there I draw it step by step to get this. And how do I start? Everything is being inclined in an angle of what? 30 degrees. That's what makes it isometric. It's not in plane form, but it's in isometric, a three-dimensional drawing. So this Mosesco tutor, if this question was being sent to me by someone, and yeah, it's being delivered. So you can contact me or message me. I take tutorials on engineering drawing AutoCAD.